Well, speaking of drama, Mariana's husband ended up having sex with his servant. We love patriarchal power dynamics. So he has sex with his maid, gets an STD from her, gives it to Mariana, who then gives it to Anne. So now Anne has fucking venereal taint. Ladies, gents, thems, welcome to my channel. My name is Ash Morgan, and here we talk about all things juicy history, especially queer history. The whole month of Pride Month, I'm going to be talking all about queer historical figures, but honestly, as I've started to dive into everything, I'm almost wondering if I want to just devote my whole channel to that, because I'm finding so many interesting queer people. We've been around for always, and so I think I might honestly devote most of my channel to that. So let me know below if that's something you're interested in. If you are interested in queer history, go ahead and subscribe, like this video, and leave a comment below. Okay, today's topic is the one and only Anne Lister, aka Gentleman Jack, if any of you guys have seen the HBO BBC adaptation of her. I'm just gonna start off right now by letting you know that Gentleman Jack is amazing. I love that series. I'm waiting for the second season. Love it. However, certain things in it are not completely historically accurate, so I'm going to unfortunately have to pop your bubble a little bit. But most of that's going to be happening in the second video. I decided there's so much juice in the world of Anne Lister that I could not possibly contain it all in one video. So I am doing part 1 today, and I'll have part 2 up next week. I have literally done hours and hours and hours of research on Anne, and I still feel like I'm just scratching the surface. So I'll probably make part 2. I just ordered part 1 of her diaries. Very thick. This is only part 1. So I've got a lot to read. I feel like even after part 2, I'm gonna have so many more things to say. Let me just start off by saying Anne Lister was born in 1791 and she died in 1840. And she was an 1800's fuckboy lesbian. You heard that right, folks. It's interesting because before all of her journals came out, a lot of people didn't even realize that lesbians even existed back then. I mean, I was reading a quote from someone who said that her journals are so fucking important because we as women throughout history, our sexuality has either completely defined us, like as prostitutes, and like all we are is sexual and deviant, or it just doesn't exist within us. Like people can't comprehend the in-between of just being a normal person that has sexual urges and acts upon them for their own benefit. So honestly, the Anne Lister diaries have been monumental when talking about feminism as well as lesbianism. Now I'm just gonna start off with a disclaimer and say that Anne lived in the 1800s, so she's a bit biased, a bit conservative. She was very Christian, and she fully believed that God gave her the gift of being gay. Like she fully like reconciled that in her head, but she was kind of self-righteous. She didn't really care to understand the poor class. There were just a lot of slightly bigoted traits that she had. That being said, it was the 1800s, not that that excuses anything, but she was ahead of her time in so many other ways. So disclaimer aside, let's hop into the juice that is Anne Lister. So in case you didn't already know, I've kind of alluded to it already, Anne Lister wrote extensive diaries. We're talking 5 million words of diaries. I believe she had 14 different books of diaries, as well as another 6 diaries that were just like little travel diaries. So that is a fuck ton of content, okay? And not only that, 1/6 of all of her diary entries were in Crypt Hand, or a secret code. This code was made from a combination of Greek, Latin, punctuation, math, zodiac signs. Like she just like compiled all these weird things, put them together, and made her own Crypt Hand, which she thought was completely undecipherable. So Anne was fully aware of her sexuality. In fact, in a time where the word lesbian didn't even exist, she just called it her oddity. Well, it was quite the oddity to others. She definitely, a lot of people were onto her, sniffing around her in her life, but still a lot of people weren't fully sure. It was one of those things where like, some things feel off, but I'm not gonna like accuse her of anything. A lot of men in her town would leer at her and poke fun at her and like jokingly propose to her in the streets. They'd send her like rude, abusive letters because you know how men are, they just love to think about lesbians having sex but not existing. They also were the ones who gave her the pretty rude title of Gentleman Jack. Fast forward about 70 years after she died, her distant relative, John Lister, ended up finding all of the journals within Shibden Hall, the big estate that she had lived in. So, John Lister and his buddy were scholars and historians and just very learned men. And they were like, this is a challenge that we will undertake, okay? Look at all of this code. Like, this is just waiting for us to decode it. We totally got this. Can't wait to see what the mystery is. Well, they end up actually cracking it. And what they found fucking horrified them. These are men in the late 1900s, okay? Back in the late 1900s, being gay was punishable by imprisonment. And a lot of men were getting this treatment, so they were like, well, shit, this is not the time to bring this out to the public. John's friend actually was like, dude, burn them all. Get rid of them. This heinous sin, this witch woman, like, get rid of her shit. Like, I'm just disturbed to have even stumbled upon this. However, John Lister just so happened to be a homosexual himself, which was very convenient. So I think he, had enough pride and allyship to recognize that this was important and that he shouldn't throw them away. So he ended up just putting them back where he found them, in the panels of the wall, and just leaving them untouched. Well, John dies, his friend is still alive in like his 80s. Shibden Hall actually becomes publicly owned. Shibden Hall was in Halifax, and the Halifax Library ended up taking ownership of the journals. And they actually asked John's friend, who was still alive, to give them the key to the code because they knew that he had unlocked it. And he at first was like very reticent. He was like, I don't think that you guys want to see what's in there. It's just not very palatable. And they're like, please, come on, just give it to us. And so he begrudgingly gave it to them. Over the years, anybody who looked at the journals and wanted to write anything about Anne, which there were multiple books written about Anne in like the 1900s, had to actually go through the council and show them all their work and make sure that nothing disgraceful got out. So there were multiple books written about Anne and all of her accomplishments, which she was quite the accomplished woman without her lesbianism. That didn't even mention it. Nobody even fucking knew she was lesbian until the 1980s. Basically, for the next 100 years, they were pretty much kept under wraps until 1982. Enter Helena Whitford, a 52-year-old school teacher who had just finished a history degree, and she was looking for some juicy goss in the history world, some really interesting historical figure to be able to write a book about. And so she'd heard rumors of Anne Lister, nothing about her being gay, just all of her great accomplishments, and had heard just little things about her in her town. And so she decided, you know what, I'm just gonna go to the archives of the Halifax Library and just see if I can find anything interesting to write about. Boy, did she find something interesting. She went to the archives, and the archivist showed her they first were showing her actually her letters, her public letters. And then the archivist was like, did you know she had a diary? And she was like, no. So he brings out one page of her diary, okay? There's her normal, awful handwriting script, as well as a little bit of her crypt writing at the very bottom. And Helena was hooked. She was like, what is she hiding? What is this all about? She just was so intrigued. She was super daunted because she looked at, Anne had awful handwriting, wrote super small. She actually would start on the sides of the margins and go around in a spiral around the paper to save paper and then start writing on the lines. So it was super small writing, just very daunting, but she was just so intrigued. And the guy told her, we actually do have the code to decipher this. And she was like, well, shit, send me home with the first 50 pages, I'm gonna try it. Well, obviously, Helena ends up discovering the truth, aka pages and pages and pages of explicit lesbian sex details. Now, she was fucking shocked, okay? She's like, this is the mid-1800s, and this woman is giving a very accurate depiction of lesbian sex in the 1800s. And she was just so amazed by this that she was like, okay, I don't care how hard this is. It took her a full 30 years to fully transcribe everything and decode everything. She's like, I need to do this work. I need to get this out into the world. This is huge. This is something that women and lesbians need to know. So she made it the work of her lifetime. Okay, so enough of that backstory. Let's get into Anne's actual life, okay? So Anne was born in 1791, and she was an Aries. Biggest Aries I've ever heard of. As you're listening to all these stories, if you know anything about astrology, I think that you'll really understand what I'm saying. Anne, big Aries energy. I'm guessing she had a lot of placements in Aries. So when she wrote in her journal that when she was young, 7 and younger, when she was supposed to be like sleeping in bed, she would actually sneak out her window and run all the way to town and see all the wild women and other raucous scenes that she shouldn't be seeing at that young of an age. So I mean, I feel like that's kind of the like 1800s equivalent of discovering lesbian porn. Her mom was a beautiful, young, weak woman who was married to an extremely absent man, okay? And they together could not handle Anne. She just was always up to mischief, just big Aries energy, big personality, didn't listen to anything they said. So her mom ends up sending her off to boarding school at age 7. Anne ended up getting whipped every single day to try to whip the tomboy out of her. Spoiler, it did not work. Well, she ends up getting sent home 2 years later, and then eventually goes to another boarding school in her teens. This boarding school responded to her just as well as the last, aka not. She was immediately an outcast, because basically all the staff was like, who is this manly girl? Like, she is going to rub off on all the other girls, and we just can't have that. So they put her up in the attic and made her a little room up there. So she was really sad and lonely until a girl by the name of Eliza Rain, aka the illegitimate half-Indian daughter of a rich surgeon in the area, came to the boarding school. Well, obviously she was an outcast as well, so she got put up in the attic with Anne, which is just the perfect breeding grounds for a gay romance. Just like Abraham Lincoln and Joshua Freispeed, just saying. It was the perfect cover-up, okay? Like, you're literally roommates. You're just roommates, just really good pals, okay? Who's gonna sniff you out? So her and Eliza would actually use the word Felix, aka the Latin word for happy, in their journals as code to describe anytime they had sex. But Anne decided, you know what, I don't want to just say Felix in my journals, I want to be able to write about every encounter in excruciating detail. And this is when she actually came up with her Crypt Hand. So this Crypt Hand was kind of fun, just to give you kind of an idea of some of the particular codes within her Crypt Hand. The word kiss actually meant sex. If she did a Q with a curly Q, then that meant really good sex. And if she did an X, then that meant orgasm. Also, she mentioned grubbing or groping often. So you can just get a little idea for some of the activities that Anne regularly participated in. Okay, so Anne ended up getting sent away from this boarding school. Obviously a bad influence, and I think they were starting to sniff out her and Eliza a little bit. So she gets sent away. Well, Eliza comes to stay with Anne and her family the summer between one of the semesters, and she's just like, they're just so in love and so happy, but they're not. See, Anne, you'll come to find, had very particular ideas of what she wanted in a woman. Her ideas were pretty similar to what men at the time wanted, aka a beautiful, pleasant woman who had lots of money and status. Anne loved that Eliza had a big inheritance that she was going to get. She was like, that's perfect for me. But she started realizing, bitch, I already got this woman. I can just already tell that I'm good at this, and I'm very intrigued by my sexuality, and I just have never tasted any other flavor of a woman. I think that I just need to spread my wings and go out into the world. And so she left Eliza heartbroken. So heartbroken that Eliza went into a deep, deep depression and was mentally ill for the rest of her life. She ended up checking herself into an insane asylum, which is very sad. And this seems to be a recurring thing that happens with Anne's lovers. So the next lover we're going to talk about is Isabella Norcliffe, aka Tib. So she met Tib when she was 19. Tib was 6 years older than her, and they really got along well. They hooked up a lot, had a great time, but Anne just couldn't commit. Tib really wanted to. She was very in love. But Anne, just being the wild Aries heart that she was just like, I don't know, you're too easy, I already got you in the bag, I just don't know about it. Plus you drink a lot and I'm just unsure about that. We know how sticky the web of lesbian dating is. So in true L-word fashion, Tib ends up introducing Anne to her next fling and love of her life, Mariana Belcombe. Okay, all of you who have seen Gentleman Jack and were really surprised by that comment because you expected me to say Anne Walker, I'm so sorry. We are going to cover Anne Walker in the next video. She does not even appear in this one, so get ready for that. For now, we are focusing on Mariana Belcombe, whose father owned an insane asylum. And guess which insane asylum? That's right, the very one that Miss Eliza Rain checked herself into. Full circle, really full circle. Anne was 21 when she met Mariana at a house party of Tib's. and she was just struck instantly by her beautiful face. We honestly lost about 4 years of journals of Anne's where they just were gone, so there was no information. So we missed a very big chunk of their relationship as well as how they met. But what we do know about how they met, which was what Anne referred to as the blue handkerchief introduction. And we can just guess from that statement, Mariana was kind of like flirting with her and dropped her handkerchief, and Anne went and picked it up, and then they started everything up. So that was a pretty common thing back in the day. So Mariana, oh Mariana. So Mariana had 4 sisters, all of which Anne seduced at one point or another. I'll get more into that in a second. It's funny because Anne was such a playboy. She actually would like tell all these women like, it's really fun and nothing bad could happen. Like, I can't even get you pregnant. Like, it'll just be some fun. And they were all like, I mean, it could be fun. That was kind of her tactics. So her and Mariana had a spicy relationship, okay? It was full of just love and passion and sex, and they just were so in love with each other. Well, unbeknownst to Anne, 4 years into the relationship, Mariana starts getting courted by this 56-year-old widower named Charles Lawton. The first thing Anne hears about it is when Mariana comes to her and asks for permission to marry him. Obviously, as the jealous lesbian that she is, she's like, abso-fucking-lutely not, and she literally gets on her knees and cries and begs her not to do it. She does it, and she basically tells Anne, like, I have to do this for my sisters so that I can gain status for them so that they can get good marriages. And Anne's just like, okay. She ends up in her journal saying that she's just basically a gold digger, she just wants the security, and that basically relating her to a legal prostitute for like selling her body for money. That being said, even with all those feelings, she's still in love with Mariana, okay? And her and Mariana actually come up with this plan. They're like, okay, Charles is way older than us, like double our age, so let me go get pregnant with his male heir, and then he can die conveniently, of course, because he's so much older than us, and then we can just move in together and be in love and raise my children together. And they're like, this is so great. Unfortunately, that plan did not happen. Charles Lawton ended up surviving Anne even. He lived to like his 90s, so they ended up getting married in 1816, and Anne, like the masochist that she is, attended the wedding. But sneaky, Anne actually wore the ring that Charles had given to Mariana, and Mariana wore a ring that Anne gave to her. So, ooh, kind of juicy. Not only this, I don't know if you know anything about 1800s wedding customs. I sure didn't, but apparently it was super common for the bride to take multiple of her sisters or friends with her to live with her for the first 6 months of her marriage as she like settled into being a wife. Well, guess who decided to join her? Her sisters and Anne. Anne hated this whole time period. She like pictured vividly her love having sex with her new husband. She just did not have a great time. And I personally am guessing that this is the time period in which she fucked all of Mariana's sisters. Just a guess. They actually ended up having their own little secret marriage ceremony in a church in 1825 where they exchanged rings and lockets with each other's pubic hair in it. So super cute and super romantic. So the whole time that Mariana was married, she would travel to and from York, and Halifax just so happened to be right in the middle. So she would stop for 3 or 4 days, get down with Anne for quite a while, or Anne would meet her up at places and they would just get down at hotels and such. Honestly, I think this is what kept Anne's interest in her for so long, because she like truly couldn't have her, and it was always something new and drama that was going on with them. Well, speaking of drama, Mariana's husband ended up having sex with his servant. We love patriarchal power dynamics. So he has sex with his maid, gets an STD from her, gives it to Mariana, who then gives it to Anne. So now Anne has fucking venereal taint, which was a form of syphilis and sounds very uncomfortable. She ended up having it for the rest of her life because it was incurable. So Anne also was seeing other people through this time period because she was like, bitch, you got a whole ass husband. Like, I need to go sow my wild oats as well. I'm not going to talk about that in this video, but it will be in the next one, so watch out for that. Well, I'm sure you are just so curious to hear how it all went downhill, because all good things just cannot last forever. So one time that Mariana was coming to visit Anne went through kind of like a manic episode, and she was just like, I need to see my lover right now. I can't even wait a single second. So she ends up walking 12 miles in the pouring rain to go meet Mariana on her route in her carriage so she can see her sooner. Well, she's so disheveled and poofy and wet and dirty, and she ends up seeing the carriage, jumping up the 3 steps of the carriage, throwing open the door, and then jumping inside to see Mariana. Well, Mariana also had her sister, a random passenger, and the passenger servant in the car, and she was just like, what the hell, Anne? That is so embarrassing. What are people gonna think? What are people gonna think? She just freaked out at her. And Anne is like, bitch, I was trying to be romantic, and it really stung. She actually talked about this incident multiple times in her journal over and over and over again after this. She just like could not quite forgive Mariana for not accepting this grand gesture of love and being such a bitch about it. Well, a few weeks later, Mariana and her are on a walk together, and 2 of their like friend acquaintances walk by these girls, and they were like, Mariana, do you want to come to our tea party tomorrow? And they just completely ignored Anne, and she was just like, okay. Anne and Mariana go home, and Anne's like, Mariana, be honest with me. Like, are you ashamed to be seen with me in public? And Mariana's like, yeah, like, you just dress way too masculinely. Like, it's embarrassing. And Anne's like, but what about my mind and my wit? Like, with all things considered, like, doesn't that make up for it? Like, would you still want to change me? And Mariana's like, yeah, I would. And that did not sit well with Anne, so she was like, bye, bitch. Well, obviously she's devastated, but a year or so later, Anne's uncle ends up dying, and she becomes the heiress of Shibden Hall, her family's manor, and she now has this whole grand estate, and guess who comes crying back to her? Mariana, the little gold digger. And Anne is just like, been there, done that, no thanks. Well, guys, I've literally been talking for half an hour, and this doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of Anne Lister. She was just a juicy gal and quite the fuckboy, and there are just so many things to tell you. So I'm gonna end this video right now, but I will be back next week for part 2. So go ahead and like this video, subscribe, comment below any questions that you have or anything that you think that I should include in the next video, and I will be back for you tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in and hearing all of the lesbian shenanigans that are Anne Lister. Can't wait to talk about Anne Walker next week. Bye.